Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 180 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. How about you?
I'm doing great. You and I just got done taping our 200th episode of True Crime All the Time. So make sure you go out and listen. It's part one of the Eileen Wuornos story, a female serial killer that has fascinated me for a very long time.
As well as me too.
She's fascinated you for a very long time?
For a very long time.
Okay.
Yeah. Me too as well.
It's a complicated story. And, there are a lot of things about Eileen's childhood, her relationship with her female lover, just a lot of things that go into kind of the mindset of why people believe she began committing murders.
Definitely a fascinating story.
Yeah. Gibbs, we have some new Patreon supporters. Let's give some shout outs there. We had Julie Spencer.
Hey, Julie.
Donna Burge.
What's going on, Donna?
Abra Bowersock.
Abracadabra.
Adrian Holmes.
What's going on? Yo, Adrian.
DeAndrea Harris.
Hey, DeAndrea.
Every Color Kel.
What's going on, Kel?
Marcella H.
Well, hey, thanks, Marcella.
Monica Brannon.
What's up, Monica?
Oda Erickson.
Hey, Oda, brother, sister to Yoda.
Joe White.
Hey, Joe.
Desiree Brown.
What's going on, Desiree?
Kristen Johnson.
Hey, Kristen.
Amy Nicholas.
Hey, Nicholas.
Ryan Talmadge.
What's going on, Ryan?
Marissa Thompson.
Hey, thanks, Marissa.
Nell Murphy.
What's happening, Nell?
Jennifer Burgess.
Well, thank you, Jennifer.
Camille.
Hey, Camille.
Sierran Waters.
What's going on, Sierran?
Lil Kitten.
Little kitty kitten.
Nick Robinson.
What's going on, Nick?
Lisa Appleby.
What are the Appleby fame and fortune? Maybe.
Maybe.
Just maybe.
Not spelled the same, but yeah.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Rebecca Pritchard.
Hey, Rebecca.
And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs.
Let's go back.
This week we selected Natasha Fellows.
Well, hello, Natasha.
So we appreciate the new support, the long-term continued support. We had some PayPal donations as well. Kate Massey.
Hey, Kate.
Daniel Javier.
What's going on? Javier.
Suzanne Gorham.
Well, thank you, Gorham.
And Julie Shantz.
Well, what's going on, JS?
So thank you to you as well. All right, Gibbs. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
Man, I really am.
We are talking about the unsolved murders of Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen. So we're headed to Australia.
Good day.
Good day for this episode. But we'll also be talking about a number of other unsolved murders and a pretty well-known serial killer who is a major person of interest in these cases.
Sure.
The unsolved murders of Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen are included with several other unsolved murders that occurred between 1957 and 1990 that were dubbed the granny killings because all the victims were elderly women and many carried walking canes. Some of these horrific murders were linked to a killer that would be known as the granny serial killer, but many others still remain unsolved. On the evening of Friday, November 21st, 1986, in New South Wales, Australia, 83-year-old Wanda Amundsen was found dead by the local police after they received a call at 5:25 p.m. from an unidentified woman saying she had not seen Wanda in several days. Once the police entered Wanda's residence on Nelson Street, they saw that it had been ransacked. And as the police continued through the home, they found Wanda Amundsen's curled up body on the hallway floor. Wanda's head had been bashed in with a blunt object. The authorities were able to determine that Wanda was a widow and had resided in the home by herself. Her house was also in a development of other retired, mostly widowed and single older adults. The neighborhood had a rash of crimes against the elderly, with several break-ins and robberies over the preceding 6 months.
Some scary things going on in that neighborhood.
Well, it sure sounds like it. A 6-month crime wave.
Right.
targeted against, some of these elderly residents
that many predators view as easy targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these people, as they, get up in age, they become vulnerable.
Right.
The strength is not there. The agility, the quickness. You can't get away from somebody. You can't overpower a grown man if you're an 86-year-old female. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Now, I say that there might be some 86-year-old females that could kick my ass. I shouldn't be so general in my statements, but I think by and large, it holds true.
We should do some type of an event where we put you in the ring with a couple 80-year-old women.
And see if they can beat me up?
Yeah. They each get a cane.
So how would I win that? Because if I strike an 80-year-old woman...
That's right. You lose either way,
I lose either way. I just have to sit there and take whatever happens.
That's the best part, because you won't strike, and they will beat you with those canes.
Oh, no. I think about my grandma. I could never hit a woman, let alone an 80-some-year-old grandma.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. We're putting your grandma in the ring with you.
Now, she probably could whip me.
Yeah.
The authorities questioned Wanda's neighbor and her son. The neighbors said Wanda was a lovely lady. She was extremely sweet to everyone there. Wanda's son, Hilton Amundsen, told the authorities that his mother was a very private and quiet person, and she had become very independent since his father passed away 10 years earlier.
Well, she did like going to the local senior club and playing some slot machines, those poker machines that a lot of people like to play, and she actually enjoyed going bowling, which I know you're a huge fan of.
I like bowling.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, huge fan, I think is stretching it, but Hilton also said that she was on a pension and she didn't have a lot of cash on hand, didn't have a lot of cash in the bank. He called her death just a senseless act of murder. And I think, Gibbs, this became even more apparent when the authorities told Hilton that they found some cash and jewelry out in plain view that the killer obviously would have seen, but left behind.
Right.
The authorities had Hilton walk through his mother's home to see if he could identify any items missing to assist the investigators on what the suspect could have stolen. But he really didn't see anything missing of value. He told the local press the place had been ransacked and the suspect was looking for something, but as far as he could tell, the suspect never found whatever they were looking for. He saw only an antique figurine missing worth about $150 and a few other collectibles, but nothing of great value. And it certainly wasn't anything worth killing his mother over.
No, that'd be like someone coming here and taking your little figurines you have over here.
My bobbleheads?
Yeah.
Or don't take my bobbleheads.
Whatever they're called. The big head things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not your bobbleheads. Those.
The pops.
Pops.
Oh, yeah, those aren't bobbleheads. Those are pops.
Yeah. I don't know who would want them anyway, but.
But here's the thing that, I kept thinking about, Gibbs, researching this case. It wasn't as though Wanda lived in a house, by herself, kind of away from everyone.
Right.
She's living in a community.
Yeah.
Designed for the elderly. You would think that would be one of the safer places for her to be.
You would hope so.
You would hope.
Yeah.
And so, I think to have something like this happen, and we talked about the fact that there had been other crimes against other elderly people in this neighborhood.
Right.
I think that was pretty shocking.
It just seems like a act of rage.
Well, I think her son said it best, right? It's a senseless murder.
Yeah.
Why? Why kill an 83-year-old woman? She doesn't have anything. You apparently didn't take anything.
Right.
What was the purpose?
Just because you're a mean person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a monster.
Exactly.
The authorities were able to determine that Wanda was last seen alive the Wednesday before her body was found. She had been at a luncheon at the club's bowling alley. The unidentified caller that tipped off the police on Friday with concerns about Wanda is unknown because that night she left a name and number that turned out to be fake. and the police were never able to figure out who the caller was.
Which is strange again for me. I mean, were you there and you felt bad what happened to her and you wanted to call the police and have them check it out? Because clearly if you were a friend and you actually did know her on that level, you wouldn't have cared if the police came and talked to you about it. If you had nothing to hide, if you had no connection to the wrongdoing.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. Let's say you had nothing to do with it.
Right.
You were a friend, but you were scared that maybe your name would get out as the person that called in.
Yeah.
And maybe whoever committed this horrible crime would try to target you.
That's a good point.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here because
valid point.
I think there is a scenario in which something like that could occur, because when somebody is murdered in a way like this, and let's not forget there had been a rash of crimes earlier, there's fear.
Right.
Do you want your name associated with this murder in any way? Not even in a bad way. I mean, in any way that would bring attention to you that somebody might read in the paper, and then take that information and say, you know what? Okay, you're going to call in on me. I'm going to target you next.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it would happen, but I could understand where somebody could be fearful of something like that.
Right.
Investigators did get a lead the next day when a woman in her early 20s withdrew a few $100s from Wanda's bank account. Investigators looked into this, but nothing really came from it. And authorities felt that the killer might have sent this young woman into the bank to throw them off.
So for me, I don't know how she would have known to go to the bank, have that type of information.
This was just something that I really struggled to understand. Okay, how was this woman able to walk into the bank? How did she even know to go into the bank unless she was in cahoots with the person that killed Wanda?
Right.
And then how did the police look into it, but they're not able to put anything together? The problem is the information is just not there. So we can't really connect the dots on how everything worked because
the lack of information.
And how was it designed to throw off investigators? If anything, it pulled investigators into the fact that somebody's trying to access her bank account. Yeah, it's a woman,
Right.
but again, how does the woman know if she was not connected somehow with the killer? It was a very convoluted part of the story. The authorities completed a medical exam 2 days later and confirmed that Wanda had received several blows to the head from a hammer. Wanda was cremated and laid to rest on November 28th at the Rockwood Crematorium. The investigators thought there was a possible tie into Wanda Amundsen's murder. That was the murder of another elderly woman just 2 years prior on August 29th, 1984. The victim, 72-year-old Josephine McDonald, was found strangled and sexually assaulted inside her home only a few miles from Wanda's house. Josephine McDonald's murder was pretty much kept out of the press in 1984 so as not to alarm the community and give them any new concerns about elderly murder victims. The authorities did not want to panic the community as it had in previous years, because from 1957 to 1977, Australia had experienced a number of murders of elderly women that went unsolved. Their ages ranged from 62 to 78 years old. On June 3rd, 1957, 68-year-old Elsie Boyes was found dead, placed in an upright position on a toilet in a public bathroom. Gibbs, her head had been bashed in with a blunt object. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. It was a gruesome find. That evening, her blue floral dress was pulled up to her waist, and her red heels were not on her feet. They were set to the side of the toilet.
Be weird walking into the bathroom stalls later, whoever discovered this and finding that scene. I could not imagine seeing that.
Now, that's going to ruin your night very quickly, but let's talk about that scene because I think there are some very odd elements. I mean, number one, you have a woman that is murdered. That's number one. But then she's propped up on a toilet. Her dress is pulled up to her waist. It appeared as though the killer most likely removed her shoes, or at the very least, they were off in a struggle and the person placed them neatly to the side of the toilet.
Yeah, it took time to do that. Again,
so there's some things to, analyze there.
Sure.
On October 19th, 1961, 78-year-old Emmy Mae Anderson was sexually assaulted and beaten to death. Then on March 22nd, 1963, 62-year-old Irene Kittle, who happened to be the Australian bridge champion at the time, was murdered near her home. She was stabbed 3 times, and the stab wounds were later determined to be her cause of death. Irene was known to walk her neighborhood quite a bit, so police theorized that she was coming home from a walk, and she saw her killer, who had propped a ladder up against her house to try to gain entry. They thought she must have called out to the killer, who then confronted her with a long-bladed knife. Police interviewed over 40 persons of interest, but no arrests were ever made.
40 persons of interest is a lot.
It is, but you have to think about how serious of a person of interest each of these are.
That's true.
I mean, all the neighbors on your street, are they potentially a person of interest? Yeah,
right.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, but I get it. 40 seems like a large number. To me, I think, and in a lot of the episodes that you and I do, a person of interest is somebody that they have a very strong suspicion in.
Right.
It may not always mean that. That's the way I usually take it, but maybe in this case it doesn't quite mean that. Maybe it does. And if so, that would be a very large number. 40 people that they had a very strong suspicion could have committed this crime.
So those other bridge players.
And maybe that had something to do with it. You don't become a champion bridge player probably without making a number of enemies. You don't become a champion in anything.
Got to take some people down to get there
without making some enemies.
Yeah.
It's kind of part of the deal.
Yeah.
Right? To be the best means you have to beat a bunch of people. And sometimes those people aren't happy. And whenever you're at the top, there are a bunch of people that are aiming for your spot.
Yeah. Well, you ought to know because you're a pretty good bridge player. I know you play at the Future Seniors of America Club here in town a lot.
I don't even know what bridge is, man. I literally have no idea how it's played. Couldn't even tell you the point of the game.
Yeah.
But I will say this. If I was the champion of my neighborhood, there'd be somebody looking to knock me off, at the very least wanting to see me fail.
Yeah, of course. That's how that kind of stuff works.
It is. On April 9th, 1968, 62-year-old Christina Yankos was found strangled to death on the kitchen floor of her house in Albert Park. The police only had one lead, and it was about a car in the area at the time of her murder. It was a greenish blue and white late model Holden sedan.
Kind of reminds me of a Chevy Nova or maybe a Chevelle in the States.
When it's interesting because on Criminology, Morph and I just put out the Anita Cobby murder.
Oh, yeah. Good story.
It is a good story, but in that story, the perpetrators were driving a Holden. And I had no idea what a Holden was. Had never heard of it. No clue. When I looked it up, I saw pictures that were very reminiscent of Chevys.
Right.
That we're used to here in the United States. And when you look at their current lineup, because they're still being made today, their lineup is essentially the Chevy lineup.
Okay.
Like they have a Holden Trax. They have a Holden this. The last name is the same as what we have here in the States. Instead of Chevy, it just says Holden.
Well,
so I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not something I was familiar with at all.
What if they have a Holden Fiesta?
Well, since that's Ford, I'm going to say no.
Thank goodness.
But they do have a Holden Sparks, I think, which is kind of a Fiesta-like car.
Yeah.
Now we're going to lose our whole Sparks audience.
Yeah. I have a Sparks. Not going to listen to you now.
Then on October 16th, 1977, 78-year-old Florence Broadhurst, who was a well-known artist and interior designer, was brutally murdered in her upstairs private changing room next to her wallpaper showroom above her factory. A neighbor saw the door to her factory wide open on that Sunday and alerted the police. Police told the media that the killer used a large piece of wood to smash her head and had also used it to break her fingers to remove some valuable rings, estimated to be worth over $100,000. Florence Broadhurst was a very wealthy woman. She ran her deceased husband's international trucking business and did the interior design work for hotels, Qantas Airline, Estee Lauder, even did some design work for the Royals' homes.
Yeah, she was pretty
big time.
Big time.
Yeah, she was big time, all right. The police found out that she had worked late that Saturday afternoon because she sent her employees home and stayed behind, telling them to leave the door unlocked because she was expecting company. When she was found dead, they saw in the office kitchen that she had prepared tea for 2 people. So police theorized she most likely knew her killer. They thought her death might have been related to some type of financial deal wrapped around the trucking business, but they were never able to find a link to prove it.
You know, those trucking business deals, got to worry about those sometimes.
Well, in the movies, the trucking business is always linked to the mob.
Sure.
I'm not saying this one was.
Right.
It just seems like the mob is always somehow involved in the trucking and or trash business in the movies.
You get into international trucking, there's a lot of money that can be made. So,
and you know that because you were an international trucker or you owned an international trucking business?
I'm partners with many international people and many...
You said it from such a place of authority.
Yeah.
Police do have a person of interest in Florence's murder, and that's a person that we'll talk about as a possibility for all these unsolved murders that we've mentioned so far. But before we jump into the main person of interest, let's go back to the unsolved murders of Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen. The authorities felt that these 2 murders had to be tied together and that both women were killed by the same person. In 1988, just 4 years after Josephine's murder and 2 years after Wanda's murder, investigators stumbled across some alarming information. At the time, they were investigating some recent attacks of 5 elderly women in the New South Wales area. Gibbs police stumbled across what they called granny porn. What they found were pornographic photographs involving local elderly women who seemed to be forced to have their picture taken in disgusting poses.
That's really disturbing.
It is.
Yeah.
Because most of the subjects appeared to be drugged or under the influence of something. I mean, this definitely did not appear as though the subjects in these photographs were doing this of their own free will.
Right.
It was as if they didn't really even know what they were doing. They were so out of it, is the way that it came across in the research. The photos were so disturbing that police put a task force together to relook at all the previous attacks on elderly women and the recent 2 unsolved murders. They also directed resources to hunting down the photographer who took these photos.
Yeah, I would want to know who's out there snapping these pictures, because he is probably going to be able to, or she, I'm assuming it's a he, but maybe it's a she, should be able to direct you to how do they find these women? What do they do to get them to perform like that? And who all the players are.
Well, I would agree. Whoever took the photos would have a lot of information and most likely would be involved in something criminal.
Yeah. Granny smut films, man.
Well, I don't think that in and of itself is criminal, but when you're doing it without the knowledge or the consent of someone, well, that's criminal. You can't be drugging people, making them undress and then taking their pictures. But, if elderly women want to show off their bodies or whatever, that's not criminal.
No. Yeah. It's up to, the individual what they want to do of their own free will.
Exactly. That's the key. Free will.
Yeah.
The task force did release some press on this, and they received several calls from elderly victims of sexual attacks. And some of these women recalled being forced to take part in some of these racy photos. I think the problem, Gibbs, is that they were too embarrassed,
right,
scared, or probably both, to alert the police when it happened.
I remember you telling me back in your college days that you were involved in some weird photography time. The guy promised you he could make you a model.
Right. That was during my Mike Honcho days.
Yeah. And he made you feel a little awkward in some of the poses and the outfits you had to wear, but you still did it for the cash.
But here's the thing, and all kidding aside, I understand that.
Yeah.
This is not an easy thing to come forward about. No. A lot of the crimes that we talk about, especially, relating to crimes against women, it's not the easiest thing in the world to walk into a police station, to pick up the phone and call the police and say, hey, here's what happened to me. Number one, I think many women have a fear and have over decades that they're not going to be believed.
Oh, yeah. Sexual harassment, sexual abuse.
And, assault. Or to your point, the information that they're giving is going to get out.
Yeah.
Their friends are going to hear about it. They're going to then be subject to ridicule, and the police aren't going to do anything anyway.
Right.
So
why even go through all that?
Exactly. I think that has entered people's minds. I guarantee you it has. So,
right.
I think that's why you and I never put blame on victims that don't come forward, because number one, we're not in their shoes.
Exactly.
And don't have to go through or live with the ramifications of what they're about to do if they were choose to come forward.
Right.
But eventually these women, or at least some of them, did come forward.
Yeah.
And admit that this happened to them. They had been drugged or, had been forced to take these photographs, but it really didn't help the authorities. They were unable to develop any substantial leads, and Josephine's murder and Wanda's murder went unsolved. And sadly, another streak of elderly murders started up. On March 1st, 1989, 82-year-old Gwendolyn Mitchell Hill was found near death inside her apartment lobby by two young boys. At first sight, it looked as though she had had a terrible fall and cracked her head open.
Well, it'd be easy to believe, right? 82 years old.
Yeah. Or to assume.
To assume, exactly.
That an 82-year-old woman had a spill, hit her head. She was rushed to the hospital. And once she got there, she died from her head injuries. But the medical staff told police that they believed her head had been hit several times with a blunt object, and her body was too, breaking several bones, including some of her ribs. So authorities went back to the scene, but the apartment manager had already cleaned up.
Yeah, well, they assumed that she just fell. So they're just, let's hose this up, let's mop this up and move on. Problem is that there was any evidence there. It's now gone.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to see that with a number of these attacks and murders. Authorities later determined that a hammer was the murder weapon and that the suspect had stolen Gwendolyn's purse. Just 2 months later, on May 9th, 84-year-old Lady Winfreda Ashton, the widow of the famous artist Sir William Ashton, was found strangled to death with her pantyhose around her neck inside the trash room of her apartment building. She had been hit in the head several times with a hammer and then dragged from the lobby to the trash room, where the killer banged her head repeatedly off the concrete floor in what authorities assumed was some type of rage before this person strangled her to death.
84 years old, and you feel the urge not only to hit her in the head, but then get her on the ground and continue to bang her head off the concrete and then strangle her.
So I get it. I get the theory that this person is enraged because there's no need to bang an 84-year-old woman's head off the concrete repeatedly. She's already out of it probably from the hammer blow. If the goal was to strangle her, this person could have just done that. But they didn't. They deliberately chose to repeatedly smash her head on the concrete. And that says something about this person.
Oh, so violent.
We're not just talking about a killer. We're talking maybe about a psychopath here,
Right.
or, somebody that's filled with so much rage. Now, the question is, where does the rage come from? And I think because we're talking about the murder of so many elderly women, to me, I think it's safe to say that, if it is the same person that has committed these attacks, these murders on elderly women, especially the ones where quite a bit of rage was shown,
Right.
most likely there's something in that person's past that, where they were upset about an elderly female figure in their life, whether that's a grandma or, whoever it is.
Right.
That's kind of where my head is leaning at this point. And I think we'll find out as we move along that police develop a similar theory. Next to Winfreda's body, police found her shoes and her walking cane, and the shoes were placed very neatly right next to her body. And I think placed is the key word there.
Right.
This wasn't haphazard. They didn't fall there. You could tell, much like the shoes that were put next to the toilet tank.
Right.
It seems as though somebody took care.
Yeah. Very orderly.
Yes. To orderly place these shoes in a very specific spot.
Killer did take her purse, but I think the strange part about this was he took the purse, but she had this really expensive diamond ring on her finger that he left behind. Why take the purse, but not the diamond ring?
Yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah.
If the killer is only interested in money, because sure, there's probably some money in the purse, but it's not going to amount to the worth of the diamond ring.
Right.
Now, some people could make the argument that, all right, killer doesn't want to have to mess with trying to fence an item that has come from a person they killed, and rightfully so. You
Sure.
can make that argument. It's a smart argument.
Yeah, because that could definitely come back to you, right? As you talked about in our TCAT episode this week, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the ways that they helped track down and nail Eileen Wuornos.
Right.
But Gibbs, I think it's still a good question to ask. Almost 6 months went by, and on November 2nd, 85-year-old Margaret Pahud was found dead on the side of the street by a teenage girl who was passing by after school. And again, how traumatic is that? You're a young girl, school's let out. Okay, maybe you're walking home.
Yeah.
Or you're walking somewhere, you find a dead body.
It's going to leave a lasting impression.
Once the police got on site, they had the body removed because it appeared as though this 85-year-old woman had tripped and hit her head on the pavement. And I think one of the reasons, Gibbs, that they initially thought she had tripped was the way that her shoes and cane were positioned. Unlike some of the other murders we talked about where the shoes were placed neatly or items were placed neatly next to the victim, Margaret's shoes and cane were deliberately placed to look as though she had fallen, and in that fall, her shoes had come off and her cane had fell in a very, specific position. But the medical examiner quickly informed the authorities that Margaret had been struck in the back of the head once, and then a second time in the side of her head, killing her. The police went back to the murder scene to investigate, but the shop owner in front of the street had washed the blood from the crime scene.
So again, anything that could have been there is now gone.
Because just like in one of the previous murders, it was thought to be an accident. Okay. Well, if it's an accident, what shop owner wants to leave a kind of a bloody mess out in front of their store?
It's not going to help business.
No. Now, if it's a crime scene, the police are going to tape it off. They're not going to let anybody inside. But it wasn't a crime scene. It was ruled an accident. So everybody's free to do what they want.
Now, what they couldn't find was Margaret's purse on the scene. So it was theorized that whoever did this clearly stole her purse.
So it was at this point, Gibbs, that police figured out they were most likely dealing with a serial killer. And they started to refer to this person as the Granny serial killer. The community was very aware of all these murders. And as you can imagine, there was quite a bit of panic.
Oh, I bet there was a lot of panic.
Someone was going around killing innocent elderly women. The investigators of Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen were no closer to finding their killer. But less than 24 hours after Margaret was found murdered, the killer struck again. On November 3rd, 1989, 81-year-old Olive Cleveland was found dead, face down on a sidewalk leading into her apartment building. She had suffered severe head damage from it being banged off the concrete repeatedly, but she died from being strangled with her own pantyhose.
So again, an act of rage, right? An 81-year-old woman, you're going to bang her head off the concrete several times before you kill her with her own pantyhose. That's rage. That's all that is.
Her purse was missing, and her shoes and cane were placed by her body. Because there were so many different victims, authorities offered a number of different rewards for information that led to an arrest of the killer that they dubbed as the Granny serial killer. But two more terrible and horrific murders would occur before police would make an arrest for some of these murders. On November 24th, 1989, 93-year-old Muriel Falconer was found murdered by her next-door neighbor. The neighbor checked on Muriel daily, and that morning she found her lying on the floor. Her head and neck had been bashed, and her pantyhose were wrapped around her neck. The contents of her purse were dumped on the floor as if someone was looking for something, maybe cash. Authorities did have a bloody shoe print this time, and an eyewitness of a man lingering throughout the neighborhood. He was described as a man in his later 40s to 50s with gray hair.
Well, that's just anybody I know.
It's everybody that you and I know.
Yeah.
Because that's our demographic.
Right.
But authorities were able to stake out the area, and they eventually found a person of interest that matched the eyewitness description. They were able to get the eyewitness to confirm the man's identity discreetly.
Which is the more important part here, right? To actually get a verifiable eyewitness match means everything.
It does and it doesn't. And here's my take on that. I think for the longest time, right? The eyewitness match has been one of the best kind of linchpins in any case.
Yeah.
And now I think a lot of information is coming out that eyewitness testimony is kind of unreliable. So I'm not trying to rain on your parade.
No,
I think it was good in this case. I'm just kind of going back through some of the more recent cases that I'm remembering where an eyewitness match was made and it later turned out that the person was wrong.
I always go back to that movie with Joe Pesci.
My Cousin Vinny?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where he talks to that old lady. It's cooking.
Why you got to call her old?
Well, she was an older lady.
The one where he keeps saying that she needs thicker glasses?
Yeah. Like maybe she's making some grits on the stove or something. He's like,
now you're confusing two separate witnesses in My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah. See, there you go. That's
the
what happens at
man
trial.
made the grits. The woman saw the two leave the sack of suds.
That's right.
And she needed thicker glasses.
Yeah. So there you go. There's your problem with eyewitnesses.
But in this case, it worked. I wasn't really trying to rain on your parade. The authorities were able to put a surveillance team on a man named John Wayne Glover. They surveilled him for several months. And then on March 19th, 1990, while surveilling him, the team happened to peek into the rear of the home he was visiting. And what they saw was a 60-year-old woman named Joan Sinclair, half naked on the kitchen floor. Her head was wrapped in blood-soaked towels, and a hammer laid next to her head. Her pantyhose were tied around her neck, and not surprisingly, at that point, police made the decision to enter the home. As they searched the house, they found John Wayne Glover passed out in a bathtub. He had tried to take his own life by cutting his wrist and downing a bottle of Valium. But police were able to get him emergency help. His life was saved, and he ended up being charged with 6 murders. John Wayne Glover pleaded not guilty to the charges. They took Glover to trial. Now, we won't dive into all of the trial details here. We may cover him in full in a future TCAT episode, but his defense attempted to show that he was mentally ill and suffered abuse from both his mother and his mother-in-law.
Which touches back on what you said earlier, that most likely he had some type of abuse from somebody elderly.
And that abuse caused him to build up a tremendous amount of rage against elderly women. And that's who he chose to take his rage out on. Now, once his mother and mother-in-law died, that's when he made the decision to take out his aggression on these elderly women. He was found guilty on several sexual assaults, and the murders of Gwendolyn Mitchell Hill, Lady Winifred Ashton, Margaret Pahood, Olive Cleveland, Muriel Falconer, and Joan Sinclair. He was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. But on September 9th, 2005, Glover took his life in prison. Just days before his death, he gave his last known visitor a sketch of a park that showed 2 palm trees, and in the middle of the palm trees, he wrote the number 9. The visitor, after learning of Glover's death, turned the sketch over to authorities. The authorities analyzed the sketch, and at some point it got leaked to the press as well. I think, Gibbs, the thought is that this number 9 could quite possibly represent Glover's total number of victims.
Yeah.
Well, the police only had him on 6.
So who are the other 3?
Right. That's the big question. But there's no way to know for sure that that's what it means. There's been a number of theories over the years about what it could possibly be. But authorities have suspicions that Glover could be a suspect in some of the other murders that we talked about. They know that in 1957, John Wayne Glover came to Australia and lived in the same city as Elsie Boyes.
The victim that was on the toilet.
Also a victim whose shoes were placed.
Yeah.
Which, you can add that element in as well.
Sure.
Could she have been one of his victims? They also know that he was in the same area at the same time as Emmy Mae Anderson. So could she potentially be one of his victims as well? The authorities can also link Glover to the wealthy designer Florence Broadhurst, because Glover's half-brother was married to one of Florence's employees, and Glover would occasionally visit.
It's a pretty strong theory, I think, knowing his history.
To be a killer, to be a known killer, and to be linked to so many other victims that died in a similar circumstance. They were elderly.
Right.
They were the same type, the demographic of your known victims.
Right.
I think that's pretty interesting, pretty compelling. It doesn't prove that he killed them, but you sure have to question whether it was him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think he definitely killed more than 6. I don't know what that magic number is. It the 9 that he wrote down? Is that his way of saying I killed 9?
Or did he just feel like I'm going to mess with the police? Or
right.
You just don't know. Now, we started off this episode talking about Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen. Authorities have not been able to solve their murders, but I think they have a strong suspicion that John Wayne Glover may have been involved in their murders as well. Now, will they ever find the proof to make that conclusive link? I don't know.
And if they did, I mean, he's gone.
He's gone. There's nothing they can do to punish him. So,
besides maybe giving their family some closure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would do that. But that's it, Gibbs. That's it for the unsolved murders of Josephine McDonald and Wanda Amundsen. Obviously, this episode was about them, but also about a lot of other victims and the work of a known serial killer. There was a lot going on in this episode.
Pretty sad times back then.
Well, sad, but to me, I kept thinking, wow, scary.
Yeah.
If you were a woman in your 60s, 70s, 80s in those areas during those times, and that was a long time frame. There had to have been quite a bit of fear in some of those communities where you really should feel safe. I said that earlier. You would think in those type of environments, that's where you would be the safest.
You would think. I worry about my mom every day, man.
Sure.
She's pushing 80, and I keep thinking, and she falls herself.
Yep.
I'll get a call at least every other week where she's tripped over a sidewalk or something.
It just happens.
Yeah. So, it makes you worry, but you also worry about she's so pure and innocent, that you worry that somebody could take advantage of that.
Right. Is she going to open the door for a salesman who's a con artist, or even worse, somebody looking to do somebody harm? Exactly. I worry about those things too.
Yeah. That's why I leave a big K-bar by the side of her door for her to grab.
That's a good son. Yeah. You're a good son.
Just put it in him to him, Mom. Just stab him right away. Don't even ask questions. I'll come clean it up later.
Or I'll hire you a good lawyer.
Yeah.
Gibbs, we got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's check them out.
Hi, guys. My name is Deborah Alexander, and I'm listening to your podcast, one of the Unsolved ones. I listen to all of them on Patreon, or I'm a Patreon supporter, but I listen to them on Stitcher. Anyway, I'm calling because I was just listening to one of your podcasts, and again, you mentioned the date June 18th. Well, that's my birthday, and I can't tell you how many times I have heard you guys mention that date where somebody either was murdered or when it disappeared. Now it was a funeral. Like, it just stands out in my mind every time, and I just think that's so strange. So anyway, I love you guys. I listen to you. I run a bakery out of my home, and I listen to you guys all day long. So I am Team Mike and Mike, and keep your own time ticking. Bye.
Yeah, Gibbs, we hear from quite a few people that think, okay, certain days get mentioned more than others, certain months get mentioned more than others as dates of, murders and things like that. That pops up quite a bit in some of the discussions that we have.
And that one thing happened on June 18th.
It did. Now don't tell her what that was, because that'll
man.
really freak her out.
Yeah, it was pretty huge.
And we don't want that.
Yeah.
And by the way, my favorite cupcakes are red velvet.
There's that tidbit.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Just drop that like that.
Mikey and Gibby, what's going on? Coming live at you from the paint booth, Minnesota. Hey, I was just listening to you guys' new podcast of the Riker sisters, and I want to have a few things to say about that. One, it's actually only about 45 minutes from where I live, and I actually did not know about this case. I think I vaguely had heard something about it, but I didn't know any of the details that you guys brought out, and it's kind of scary and sad to think about that. It does come close to home. Also, I wanted to talk about how you guys were talking about back when you guys grew up. You guys could roam around and nobody cared, and, come home and the lights turn on. I'm 35 years old. I got 6 kids, and I don't let them pretty much go anywhere without me knowing about it. My oldest has actually just started high school today. And, but I grew up in the 90s, and actually, my buddies and I would be gone from sun up to literally sundown riding bike, and my mom and dad had never a clue where I was, but, my mom and dad grew up in that time too, and they did, they trusted our judgment, and, well, I don't trust my kids' judgment that much, so. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys doing what you do, as always. Keep your own time ticking, boys. Have a good one.
Well, we always love to hear from the paint booth.
Oh, we do.
You and I have talked about that quite a bit. Now, what I will say is I trust my kids' judgment. I really do. I don't trust anybody else. I think that's the problem.
You don't even trust me.
No, that's why I have you monitored.
Yeah. There's
a sensor that goes off if you stray into a room that is marked off limits. No. I don't, it's kind of like driving. I trust myself driving.
Right.
I just don't trust any of the other cars around me.
Yeah.
To stay in the lane, to not swerve over and hit me. It's kind of the same thing. And it's even worse when I'm on my motorcycle, because people don't really pay attention that much.
Well, that's where you got to be even a bigger defensive driver.
Exactly. I can't ram them like I do with my big truck.
You're right.
Hi, guys. This is Abby from Louisville, Kentucky. I have actually been listening to you guys since 2018, and I listen to you religiously as soon as your old episodes come out every week. I really, really love what you guys do. It's just the way you all cover the content and how respectful you are of the victim. I absolutely adore you. Also, I have to say, I just listened to another voicemail of someone from Louisville who called, and I have to say, Gibby, yes, it is Louisville, Kentucky, not Louisville or Louisville. I have to also say that I cannot pick a team that I'm on because I love you all both, and the show couldn't be without either of you. So thank you guys for everything you do, and keep your own time ticking.
She probably likes the Cardinals and the Wildcats.
I doubt it. There's very few people that like both. I will say that.
Well,
there's very few people that will root for both. You're usually one or the other.
Well, she seems like a really good person.
You're dancing over the fact that she has corrected you, as many people have, but you continue to say it incorrectly.
But was she born there?
I don't know.
See, it's a difference.
But she said it the way I say it.
If you're not
which means
born there,
it's correct.
You just don't really know, do you?
Well, you weren't born there either. So.
If you came after
How
the
does
merger,
that logic play
if
at
you came
all?
after the merger with the county down there, now you're calling it, Louisville or whatever.
That's still not right. You're still not saying it right. It's not Louis.
Louis.
It's not Louis.
It's Elville.
Maybe you should just start saying that.
It's Elville.
Hey Mike, hey Gibby, it's Amanda calling from Brisbane in Australia, not prison. If you remember my last phone message, you thought I was calling from prison. I'm not, I'm calling from Brisbane, as you would say. So I just wanted to let you guys know I'm off on the road collecting animals again. You can possibly hear them in the background doing animal rescue. Now I was listening to episode 197 today where about Julie Love, and I noticed in the mailbag that you got an Australian pack and you were talking about Vegemite. Now Vegemite is a really important piece of Australian food. So Vegemite, you can't really live on it for a diet, and it is not really a good taste if you're not used to it because it's literally just pure salt. But it is great on toast if you just spread a little thin amount on it. Not a lot, more butter than Vegemite. But anywho, just wanted to say that I loved the last episode and I really look forward to downloading them because I listened to True Crime all the way on my 4,000 kilometre journey, which is probably about 2,400 miles, and it gets me through all of that and back with all of these cats and dogs on board. So really love what you do. I really love listening to it, and I love that you include Australian stuff as well. Keep your own time ticking. Bye, guys.
Well, that fits just in time for this
Yeah.
episode.
Well, hopefully she likes this episode. So, the Vegemite thing again.
Yeah.
I've tried it twice.
Yeah.
I'm never going to acquire that taste. I can just tell you right now.
And if you can only put a little bit on, because if you put too much, it's too strong. Why even eat it then? It's like you're like, we have to eat it because it's a thing. So we put a little bit on.
It's an Australian thing.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's
maybe not eat it.
Obviously, there are a lot of things that are acquired taste.
Sure.
I get that.
Yeah.
This is one that I'm never going to acquire because I just can't. I can't force myself to spend that much time trying to acquire.
As you say, I'm an acquired taste.
You are.
It takes a while.
You are.
But it is what it is.
But we appreciate it. And I do remember her leaving the last voicemail.
It is amazing, though. She is 2,000 miles.
The journey?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot. That's a lot of
It
time.
is a lot. It's like 4,000 kilometers.
You're so smart, man.
To you and me.
Exactly.
All right, buddy. We got to get out of here.
All right.
That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
And Gibby.
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.